There have been a lot of Star Wars movies and shows that have been released over the years, but there have also been a lot that haven't been released. These are all the Star Wars movies and spin-offs that were in development, what they were going to be about, and why they were cancelled. Prior to the release of the very first Star Wars movie, creator George Lucas hired author Alan Dean Foster to write the novelization of the film's script, concept art, and rough footage. Not only that, but Alan was also asked to write a sequel novel for a movie that could be adapted into a low-budget film in case the first Star Wars movie ended up flopping at the box office. This included doing things like using the same sets, costumes, and props that were seen in the first movie to save costs. Believe it or not, 1977's Star Wars is one of the most financially successful movies of all time. Therefore, the sequel novel, titled Splinter of the Mind's Eye, was not required as George Lucas could create a big budget version. However, as this book has been published, we know what the plot would have been about. Luke, Leia, R2-D2 and C-3PO were en route to join the Rebel Alliance, but an energy storm caused them to crash land on a swampy planet known as Mimban. While trying to find a way off-world, they came across an elderly woman named Hala. She offered to help them in exchange for assistance in finding the legendary Kyber crystal, which was said to amplify the Force. Along their journey, they faced interesting creatures, became separated, and learned that Darth Vader is on their tail. They race to the temple, finding the crystal before Luke defeats a monster and later battles Vader. Luke cuts Vader's arm off before falling into a pit, but he senses the Sith Lord's story may not yet be over. As you may have noticed, there was no Han Solo or Chewbacca as a way to cut down the budget. The misty swampy jungle planet was also a conscious effort to reduce set and background costs.
It's like something out of a dream, or I don't know.
With the 6-film saga complete, George Lucas had plans to expand the universe to television with a big budget show set between the two trilogies. At 2005's Star Wars Celebration, Star Wars Underworld was announced, a series that would focus on the criminal underworld featuring characters like Han Solo, Lando Calrissian, Boba Fett, Darth Vader, and Palpatine. Over 100 episodes had been planned, and test footage was even created before the decision was made to cancel the project due to how expensive it would be. The company that created the test footage, Stargate Studios, used Visual Backlot Live, which was almost an early concept or inspiration for what stagecraft would become, the technology that was used to film The Mandalorian. Said technology ultimately became the reason shows like that could be made, because it heavily reduced certain costs. Basically, George's ideas were always ahead of its time, but it does mean that now, this show could be made. Some of the leaked script ideas for Star Wars Underworld included learning about a woman Palpatine loved and Darth Vader stopping an uprising. When Disney bought the rights to Star Wars in 2012, they even used some of these concepts for movies and shows like Rogue One, Solo a Solo Han Solo Star Wars Solo Movie, The Mandalorian, Obi-Wan, Boba Fett, and Andor.
What's the situation?
The sequel trilogy went through a number of variations before the version we got. George Lucas had already created the story treatments for a 12-film saga by the time he was making The Empire Strikes Back, with the final film said to have taken place about 55 years after the events of The Phantom Menace. His first sequel trilogy would have seen Luke continue his journey as a Jedi, introduce his sister, who was not Leia, give him a romantic partner, who was also not Leia, and would have featured his first encounter in battle against the Emperor. However, as you can see, a lot of these ideas would have contradicted what eventually ended up happening in the original trilogy. George even said that this was because he no longer intended it on being a 12-movie saga due to how exhausted he was making those first 2 films. Although his opinion on that changed after the prequels, revealing his new sequel trilogy ideas. Luke would have been rebuilding the Order with around 100 surviving Jedi. One of the students would be a Jedi Knight named Kira. He would be training Leia in the ways of the Force, while she was also leading the New Republic. Darth Maul would have been resurrected and leading a crime syndicate. We would learn more about the midi-chlorians. There'd be a world of creatures called Wills who control the universe and feed off the Force. And both Han Solo and Luke would have died, which actually made it into Disney's version. While a lot of this didn't happen, some of the concepts that were actually used were inspired by his treatments that were handed over to Disney when they purchased the franchise. But George Lucas' sequel trilogy ideas weren't the only ones that were scrapped. Just after the release of episode VII, Colin Trevorrow was announced to be the director of episode IX. Then, just after the release of episode VIII, Colin Trevorrow was announced to no longer be the director of episode IX. This was reportedly due to creative differences and an unsatisfactory script that was written by Colin and Kong Skull Island co-writer Derek Connolly. But it also could be due to the movie he directed just before that, The Book of Henry, which unfortunately was negatively reviewed. However, you can make your own minds up about that, because the script has been leaked online. Titled The Duel of the Fates, it would have seen the First Order controlling the galaxy, with General Hux as the Chancellor, who has stopped all intergalactic communications. Rey, Finn, Poe, BB-8 and Rose, who actually has something to do in this version, meet up with what's left of the Resistance, led by Leia. Kylo Ren visits Mustafar, finding a Sith hologram that leads him to seek training from Tor Vellum, the master of Darth Plagueis, and Palpatine. During this training, Kylo learns the ability to absorb energy and battles a fake Vader like what Luke did in The Empire Strikes Back. Feeling his training is now complete, Ren kills his master, using his newly learned power to drain Tor Vellum's energy. Rey is also training in the Force, but with Ghost Luke Skywalker. She uses those books to discover the existence of a device that will restore intergalactic communications. So Finn, Rose, R2-D2 and C-3PO head out to find this device, which is located in a Jedi temple on Coruscant. They find and activate it, but they themselves are found by the First Order. Finn battles and defeats a stormtrooper, but spares their life, convincing this stormtrooper, plus others, to join the Resistance. Meanwhile, Rey, Poe and Chewie travel to the planet of Mortis after Rey had a vision of having a duel of the fates against Kylo there. However, before they arrive, they're attacked by Kylo and the Knights of Ren, leading to Rey killing one of the Knights because she believed they killed her parents. This anger causes fear in Rey, realizing she must be turning to the dark side, so decides to continue the journey to Mortis alone, while Chewie and Poe go back to the Resistance, who are all in a battle on Coruscant. Lando has even joined their cause. The Resistance defeat the First Order, where Hux gives himself a lightsaber to the Tum-Tum, but that's something we know you can survive, so who knows what his fate would have been. He also became obsessed with the Force in the movie, but discovered that he wasn't Force sensitive. Two people who are Force sensitive are Rey and Kylo, who arrive on Mortis, where Ren reveals that he actually killed her parents under Snoke's orders, so they have a duel of the fates where Kylo blinds Rey. She then decides to go against Luke's teaching on rejecting the dark side and instead embraces both light and dark, finding the right balance to defeat Kylo Ren. However, before he dies, he decides to give up his Sith identity when Leia's Force presence persuades him to die as Ben Solo. His last words reveal that Rey's actual name is Obi-Wan Kenobi. I'm just kidding, it's Rey Solana. Every other major Jedi also return to Rey as a ghost, offering her a choice to die too, but she decides to live on to rebuild the Jedi Order using both light and dark sides of the Force. Essentially, the Duel of the Fates seemed to be more of a conclusion to The Last Jedi, rather than a correction for the people who didn't like The Last Jedi.
You are a Palpatine.
While George Lucas was working on the original Star Wars trilogy, he was planning the prequels, but his initial ideas have later come to light, which have significant differences to what we actually got. Some of these ideas included Anakin being less manipulated by Palpatine, instead coming to his own conclusion that the Jedi had conflicting beliefs to him, so killed them off individually. Padme would be the first one suspicious of Anakin's turn to the dark side. She also wouldn't have died in childbirth, instead look after the twins for the first 6 months of their life before Obi-Wan suggests splitting them up. Padme would go with Leia to Alderaan, but somehow dies a short time later. One of the main reasons George Lucas ultimately changed these plans was because of advancements in technology, allowing him to think of bigger ideas.
Now this is pod racing!
Before Boba Fett got his own TV show, he was going to get his own movie. The project began development in 2013, intended to be the second spin-off in the Star Wars universe with a 2018 release date. Josh Trank was hired to direct, with Simon Kinberg writing, but it's believed Trank left the project just before the release of the 2015 Fantastic Four movie, which he directed, because Disney intended on letting him go when they were made aware of that film's quality and behind-the-scenes drama. A concept trailer was put together and intended to be shown at Star Wars Celebration along with Josh Trank's announcement, but that was pulled just before the event. It was also said that this version of the movie would have featured all the bounty hunters seen in Star Wars Episode V, The Empire Strikes Back. The Wolverine director, James Mangold, was eventually brought on to be Trank's replacement, but as the Boba Fett film continued its development, Disney released Solo, a solo Han Solo Star Wars solo movie, a film which unfortunately performed poorly at the box office. This led to Lucasfilm rethinking how they would move forward with their Star Wars franchise, and in 2018, the year the movie was supposed to be released, Lucasfilm CEO Kathleen Kennedy confirmed that a Boba Fett film was no longer in that plan. A Mos Eisley Spaceport, or Tatooine film, was also affected by the restructuring. Art director and designer Neil Lamont was the one who said the movie was in development, then the next day, it was reported to be cancelled. Another factor for the Boba Fett movie being definitively cancelled may have been due to James Mangold stating that his version would have been borderline R-rated. However, because of the success of The Mandalorian on Disney+, Lucasfilm saw this as an opportunity to bring that Boba Fett idea to the small screen. And after bringing the character back in The Mandalorian, Boba eventually got his own 5-part miniseries in 2021 with a 7-episode season.
If you choose the armor, you'll return to your friend, the Mandalorian.
Like Boba Fett, Obi-Wan Kenobi's story was initially going to be a movie. In fact, it was going to be 3 movies. Stuart Beattie, who ended up co-writing the series, initially pitched the ideas as a movie trilogy. The restructuring of Lucasfilm's approach to their Star Wars franchise was the reason for Kenobi's switch from the big to small screen, but the first season of Obi-Wan only took ideas from his first movie, so there's still 2 more movies worth of ideas out there if Disney decides to give us a 2nd and 3rd season. The very little we know about these ideas is that it would have had Qui-Gon explain to Obi-Wan that he needed to eventually sacrifice himself to have Luke become the new hope in saving the galaxy. So the story would have seen Kenobi coming to terms with his own morality and accepting that he's going to have to die in A New Hope. The Rise and Fall of Jabba the Hutt was a movie in development by Guillermo del Toro and writer David S. Goyer back in 2017. The script was described as The Godfather meets Scarface meets Star Wars, a journey about how Jabba the Hutt got control. However, this seemed like a situation where Del Toro went to Lucasfilm with the script rather than the other way around. So this was a case of a big-name director pitching an idea and hoping for the best. Unfortunately for Guillermo, the script just ended up on a pile with many other Star Wars screenplays that had been written but never made. In 2018, Game of Thrones showrunners David Benioff and B.D. Weiss were hired to produce an entire Star Wars spin-off trilogy. Their intentions were to make it about the First Jedi. We will learn about how and where the first lightsaber came from, and delve into the origin of how the Jedi Order came to be. Benioff and Weiss even met with George Lucas on several occasions to discuss the project in depth. By October of 2019, the pair had signed a mega deal with Netflix to produce content for their streaming service. This led to Lucasfilm letting them go from the Star Wars franchise, as it would be difficult to focus on 2 things at once. Apparently this was a relief for the duo, who claimed that moving from one major franchise immediately to another would have been stressful. Fans of Game of Thrones weren't shy about hiding their opinions about the final season, in the same way that Star Wars fans also have an opinion or two. Despite all of this, James Mangold is currently working on a Dawn of the Jedi movie and is said to be taking a lot of the same concepts that Benioff and Weiss were looking to explore in their movies. Only time will tell if that movie is also cancelled.
Master Skywalker, there are too many of them. What are we going to do?
Go-Go Rangers of the New Republic is a cancelled show that was intended to be a spin-off to The Mandalorian, focusing on Cara Dune. One of the main reasons for the series being cancelled was because of Cara Dune actor Gina Carano being fired by Disney and Lucasfilm for controversial and hateful social media posts. If the series still went forward, it would have taken place after the events of The Mandalorian Season 2, exploring how the Empire's legacy is affecting the wider galaxy. However, some of these ideas were later included in the 3rd season of The Mandalorian and Ahsoka, so they kinda still told the story that the Rangers of the New Republic series would have told.
What about the others?
There are no others.
Kevin Feige is one of the most successful producers of all time. Best known for overseeing the MCU, Feige is a huge Star Wars fan and was asked to develop a movie in that universe in 2019. His Star Wars film was to be written by Loki writer Michael Waldron with the Russo brothers in early talks to direct, but it's unclear as to who actually asked Feige to produce the project. Kathleen Kennedy said that Feige's project was something announced to the press or fandom, but they never discussed an idea. If he did come up with something, she would be all ears. But that's never happened. There are no details as to what the film would have been about, other than being a standalone movie, but the cancellation was probably due to Disney wanting Feige to focus his time and energy on the Marvel Cinematic Universe, getting the ship back on track after a few financially and critically disappointing entries.
You ever seen that really old movie? Empire Strikes Back?
Damon Lindelof is probably best known for co-creating Lost with The Force Awakens director J.J. Abrams. But unlike J.J. Abrams, Lindelof didn't get his Star Wars movie made. That movie was supposed to be a Rey Skywalker film. Now, a Rey film is still moving forward, but Damon's version was significantly different, and worth mentioning. The main difference is that the original idea was said to have taken place 60 years after the events of The Rise of Skywalker, therefore requiring a recasting with an older actor. The new version is going to be bringing Daisy Ridley back to reprise her role.
Rey Skywalker.
The Acolyte set up Yoda or something, but it looks unlikely we'll be seeing that cliffhanger explored as the second season of the series has been cancelled. It's hard to tell if the first season was mixed or negatively reviewed because of all the review bombing, but the underwhelming viewership of the series, plus a $180 million redo budget, would have been enough for the decision to not continue the show. Although, when I say underwhelming viewership, it still did higher numbers than Obi-Wan Kenobi, The Book of Boba Fett, and Ahsoka. But that also doesn't really mean much, as none of those shows have gotten a second season either. The thing that this series has going for it is that the story can still continue in a different series with different characters, as it's all an interconnected universe. So to those hoping to see the cliffhanger explored, you may get some kind of conclusion in the future.
Do or do not. There is no try.
Back in 2020, J.D. Dillard was in development of a secret film set in a galaxy far, far away. Matt Owens, who has written things like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Luke Cage, was to pen the script, which was rumoured to be inspired by the TIE Fighter video game taking place on Exegol, with the story following a Sith character. And that's pretty much all the information we have on that. In 2022, Dillard confirmed that the project was no longer moving forward, but was not for a lack of trying. The thing about movies is that there are so many of them that go through the development process and never get made. Dillard's Star Wars film was never officially announced by Lucasfilm, it was just reported on by different outlets. I'm sure there are many other Star Wars films that go through the development stage in complete secrecy that never get reported or rumoured on.
I got him! Great kid! Don't get cocky!
I already mentioned that George Lucas had ideas for a 12-film saga split into 4 trilogies. Well, a Droids movie and Wookiees movie were a part of one of those trilogies. Lucas told Preview magazine that he came up with some ideas for a film about robots with no people in it, and a movie with just Wookiees. A movie with just Wookiees could have been really interesting. It could have had a real WALL-E vibe about it, relying more on visual storytelling rather than spoken dialogue. Neither the Wookiee movie or the Droids film were necessarily going to feature Chewbacca, R2-D2, or C-3PO, but I imagine as they were established characters in the universe, they would have at least made a cameo. George referred to these as odd movies, which he later decided to move on from because they didn't really have anything to do with the Star Wars saga. Even though neither of these movies were made, there was an animated show released in 1985 titled Star Wars Droids.
Trouble again!
Back before George Lucas sold Lucasfilm to Disney, director Zack Snyder pitched a Star Wars movie to him. While nothing came of that, Snyder once again pitched the idea to Kathleen Kennedy shortly after Disney's acquisition. His idea was essentially 7 samurais, but in space. So, Star Wars. Snyder added that the story would be simple, good versus evil. It would feature no pre-existing characters, stand alone from the rest of the franchise, and also be rated R. Basically, because Disney's purchase of Lucasfilm was so fresh, Zack knew they would be looking for many ideas, so saw this as an opportunity to pitch his. Ultimately, his idea was turned down due to being too far away from the direction Disney was wanting to go in, particularly with the R rating. This didn't really seem to bother Snyder, as he knew what he was pitching was probably going to be rejected. However, this movie actually got made. It just doesn't have the Star Wars title, instead being called Rebel Moon.
That's no moon.
Solo, a solo Han Solo Star Wars solo movie, had an estimated budget of around $300 million, but only made $393 million at the worldwide box office, which would have lost them a lot of dollary dues, because Disney doesn't get all that money. A significant percentage of that goes to the cinemas. For this reason, the movie's planned sequel was cancelled. Although, being a shared universe, some of those loose ends left in the first film can be answered in other movies or shows, or even a Donald Glover-led Lando spin-off that may or may not still be happening.
I don't like it. I don't agree with it. But I accept it.
Speaking of spin-offs that may not happen, there has also been a cancelled third Ewoks TV movie, and a few Star Wars projects that have been in development for a while, but haven't had much movement on them, so may have been quietly cancelled. One of those is a Taika Waititi film, another is a Rian Johnson trilogy, and a third is a Knights of the Old Republic movie. Do I think any of these will be made? Honestly, based on the amount of cancelled films and the fact that we haven't gotten a Star Wars movie since 2019, I doubt all these announced projects in development will be produced. Out of the three options, I think the most likely would be a Knights of the Old Republic film, just because it's already a title Star Wars fans know. But I would love to see some fresh and original stuff with some unique storytelling and style, which is something that both Taika and Rian can provide.
May the Force be with you.
If you like this series, I've also made a few videos about other cancelled movies, including Marvel, Spider-Man, and X-Men, which you can check out in the playlist. But thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments which of these Star Wars movies you wish was made, and don't forget to absolutely obliterate those like, subscribe, and share buttons. I'm just kidding. Only do it with enough force that it registers. I don't want any of you breaking whatever device you're watching this on.